In this video, I'm going to show you another way in which you can paint a picture. Now, first I'll show you one way that is used, and in this way you begin your picture by laying in large masses of tone, such as I'm doing here in this rough example. And many pictures, especially the ones for concept art, are begun this way. This is the method that is used. It's a good method, and you can arrive at some really great looking paintings this way. Now, there's also another method. Instead of beginning with laying in large masses of tone, you begin by doing a drawing. And I'll do a rough sketch here, very rough. So the artist draws his or her forms, and after the drawing is done, then those larger masses of tone are laid in. And usually they're laid in flat, and then light and shadow are added. So to this figure in the foreground, I'll add a dark shadow. Like this, see? There's a shadow on the right side, and then I'll add light falling on to the left side. The shadow is always opposite of where the light is. So a light and shadow pattern has been established. So this is the second way to paint a picture. However, there is another way, which I'm going to show you. Now for this third approach, and it consists of using photographs and starting out right from the beginning with photographs, not doing any drawing or painting, but rather selecting various photographs and using them to come up with a good composition. And I'm going to show you that now by bringing in some photographs and showing you what the procedure is for working with photographs right from the beginning. At this point, I really don't have any idea yet as to what this picture is going to look like. The photos that I'm going to be working with will suggest ideas to me as I'm working with them. And you can see one of them is a mountain, and then this entrance here. The photos are raw material that suggest ideas to you as you're working with them. So I'm going to be bringing in a lot of different photos. I'm not concerned at this point with color schemes or any value patterns or anything like that. You bring the photos in and you leave them just the way they are, the color they have, the values they have. You don't make any changes to them at this stage. And you can bring in a lot of different photos, as you'll see, which is what I'm going to do. And then you can select various photos, keep them, delete others. And you can see that I brought in this tower here, and I'm combining it with this entrance. And the idea is to combine the different photos and create different arrangements. And then as you're doing this, ideas come to mind as to what can be done. Using photos can also help you to get a more realistic appearance to the painting. And I'm thinking of repetition, which is one of the most important principles of design. So you see me repeating this form here again and again. And I'm trying different arrangements. The objects or photos that you're working with can be changed in all sorts of different ways. Position them at various places within the picture area, as I'm doing here, to see if they work best, let's say in the lower left, or maybe the lower right, or maybe they have to be moved toward the top of the picture. Maybe they have to be enlarged, maybe they have to be stretched or made smaller. All sorts of modifications can be made to the photos that you're working with. The idea is to come up with a good composition. Now, there are a lot of elements here. Those elements can be either deleted or fewer of them used, or maybe you need more Maybe you need to simplify the picture. Those decisions you'll make as you're working on the picture. The photos that I'm using here are either my own photos or photos that I got off of the web that are public domain photographs, which means you can use them. There's no copyright for them. Or you can get photos from various stock image places on the internet. Now you pay a small fee and you can get the images that you need. At this stage, it doesn't look like much, and it's not supposed to. I'm just rearranging these images to come up with an interesting composition. And then, slowly, a story begins to emerge from these images that I'm working with. Now here you can see this ladybug. Now the ladybug is going to turn into a spacecraft. Use your imagination. Try to see different things within an image. The ladybug suggested to me a spacecraft. You'll see me using a lot of repetition. I'm applying the principle of design called repetition. Your pictures need to have this repetition to create unity. And this is one of the fundamentals of design that you need to learn about if you don't already know about repetition and what it can do for your pictures. This dome-like structure or building looked futuristic to me. So I'm getting this idea of some kind of futuristic looking building maybe. And I found a photograph of some leaves which I'm adding to the foreground. This helps to create a greater feeling of depth. You can see how the building is beginning to take shape by combining these different images like this. At this stage, I'm not painting over the photos yet, except for a little bit which I did for the mountains, but I'm still concerned with construction at this stage. And my idea is now to construct this building here, out of which the spacecraft are coming. And here you can see a picture of the Grand Canyon, and I'm using part of that picture. I like these rocks, and I'm thinking of placing them in the foreground. You can pick up just parts of a photograph that you're working with, maybe just some detail, and you can use that detail in your picture, or you can enlarge it to a very large size, or don't use it at all. It's up to you. If that part of the picture suggests something to you that you might be able to use that part, then go ahead and use it. You don't have to use the entire photograph. And now you can see I'm adding some kind of platform to the entrance of this building here. And here I'm painting in the entrance. The photos that you use also can act as a means through which you can apply different textures to your picture. You can use the photo and then create an overlay layer with that photo over the image that you're working on to add some texture. Now, textures will enhance the entire picture. Textures enhance the surface of forms. Very important that you use textures. Now here I'm just selecting this part of the photo, which is this woman, and she's going to be part of this picture. So I'm thinking of placing her in the foreground, and she may be observing what is going on. Maybe she's going to be taking a photograph of what is going on. Maybe she's some kind of spy. I don't know yet. I'm beginning to think of some kind of story that could go with these images. Things are slowly beginning to take shape, but I'm not there yet. There's still a lot to do. In later stages, I'll be applying paint. I'll be painting over the photos, changing them in different ways, and some of these photos may disappear completely. Now, I brought back some of the mountains in the background. Previously, they were hidden too much. Working with this method, you start out by not having any idea as to what the picture is going to be about. Let the images that you're using suggest what that picture is going to be and what the story is going to be. Every picture must have a story. It must have some kind of meaning. If you just have a pretty looking picture without any story behind it, without any real meaning, then you may have a pretty looking package, but there's nothing inside. I haven't begun to modify these ladybugs yet into spaceships, but I'll be doing that a little bit later. Now, when you're assembling these photos, just keep rearranging them until you come up with an interesting looking structure, interesting looking shapes. At this point, I decided to start working out some kind of value pattern. So I created a layer, and then right over that layer, I start adding these different values to come up with some kind of value pattern. Instead of working out the value pattern with thumbnail sketches, I'm working right over this picture on an overlay, applying different values and different value patterns. I added another layer over which I'm working out the color pattern. Now you can see me applying different colors here, trying to come up with an interesting color pattern. That's a quick way of working out your value patterns and your color patterns. I'm thinking of having the dominant color maybe be a grayed blue-violet, and then the building with the entrance a yellow. This gives me a strong value contrast. The blue-violet is a dark value while the yellow is a light value, so it'll help to create a focus. The eye will be drawn to the building, but I'll be working on that later on. Right now I'm still making changes, using levels to darken or lighten various images, and then color balance to add color to those images. You can see the blue-violet color being added to the mountains and the foreground rocks. At this stage, I'm beginning to think in terms of what color these different images should be. And you can apply the color using color balance, which is a good way of adding color. These different images that you're going to be using are going to have different kinds of perspective to them. Now, the perspective needs to be correct. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to feel right or look correct. So you have to keep perspective in mind, which means that you need to know the fundamentals of perspective. Using this method by having these different photos and assembling some kind of picture with them means that you also need to apply the fundamentals. If you just use a bunch of different photos and put them together and arrange them in some kind of picture, and you don't apply the fundamentals, then your picture is going to look awful. It just won't work. You need to know the fundamentals and apply them. Otherwise, you'll just wind up with chaos. It just won't look good unless you know the fundamentals and apply them. Now here you can see me adding a shadow to the top of this building. So there's a light side and a shadow side. I'm thinking in terms of form, of three-dimensional form, light and shadow patterns. I decided to get rid of those dome-like buildings and just repeat the top part of this tower. So I'm getting the principle of repetition in here that I mentioned earlier. Very important to get that into the picture. I may decide to bring those dome-like futuristic-looking buildings back later on, but right now I want to try something different. Many changes are made during the process of assembling these different photos. The ladybugs are now morphing into spacecraft. They're beginning to look more like flying vehicles. And I'm working on the vegetation on the left side, all those leaves and trees that are there, but it's basically just one large dark mass. And that dark mass in the foreground adds depth, but the values further back need to be made lighter, which I'll do later on. Right now I'm also experimenting to see if I should add this road that leads to the entrance. And you can see me painting right over the photos. Now, it's a combination of using photos and painting. A value pattern is beginning to emerge. You can see the light value of the entrance and that building and the road against the darker background of the mountains and sky. And that's the value pattern that I worked out earlier. You can see me occasionally flipping the picture so that I see it in reverse, and this is very important because any errors will show up. They'll be more easy to spot when you get a fresh view of the picture, and you get that fresh view by just flipping the image. I'm also using the stamp tool, and this enables me to repeat certain parts of an image easily and quickly, and then I can go over those parts later on and make changes if I have to. I decided that I needed a monorail in the foreground that is heading in the direction of the entrance. So it helps to lead the eye of the viewer into the picture and fills out that area at the lower left side of the picture. It adds some interest to that part. Every part of the picture needs to be interesting, but some parts need to be more interesting than others. And the most interesting part needs to be the center of interest. And the center of interest here is this building with this giant entrance. You can see that a picture is beginning to emerge here from all of this chaos that existed in the beginning when I brought in all of these different photos and started to assemble them. Various parts of the picture need to read clearly, but some parts should be less noticeable than other parts. I want the building with the huge entrance to be the most noticeable part. But then other parts that are not as important, like the vegetation on the left side, all those leaves and trees and bushes that exist in this giant mass of dark tone, they're not that important. And here I'm bringing in a photo of clouds. The sky needed to be made more interesting and more dramatic looking, and these dark clouds will do that for me. Now, I use the overlay blending mode for these clouds. When you bring in photos, some photos you can apply the overlay blending mode to. And that blending mode will also help to add textures to various images. I had to bring back the photo of the mountain because what was there was lost too much. So I brought back the photo and then applied the overlay mode to that photo to show more of the mountain rock texture. As I continue to work on the picture, I add additional colors to create more color variety, and I need to make some changes to the shape of the large spacecraft in the foreground. It's not a very interesting shape, so I have to add some other shapes to make that a more interesting overall shape. And I'm adding some different greens to the vegetation on the left to give a bit more color variety. And the woman needs to change a bit. I need to add her face so that she's looking over toward the left to where the monorail is. And this creates a compositional movement. The eye follows the direction in which a head is looking. This is called an implied directional line. There's a circular compositional movement that occurs here. The woman looks to the left to where the monorail is. The monorail moves in the direction of the entrance, and where the entrance is, the spacecraft are coming out of that entrance, so the eye follows the spacecraft to where the large spacecraft is, and then from there the eye drops down to where the woman is. Now here I'm adding a black layer to the top of all of the other layers that I have, and when you do that, go to the blending mode that says saturation, and you can see the entire image in black and white, and this enables you to spot places where you may need to create more or less value contrast. Create more value contrast where the center of interest is, and in my case here, it's this building with the large entrance. So I placed a darker background behind this building so that there is a strong value contrast. And I'm adding some additional shapes to a large spacecraft to make the overall shape more interesting. Sometimes the photos that you begin with will be changed completely. Other times they won't change all that much. And some photos that you started out with will be deleted entirely. Some of the photos that you use will need to have their values changed so that they stand out more, so that they pop more, so to speak. For example, the woman in the foreground was a little too dark, so I had to add some lighter values to make her stand out more. She's an important part of the picture, so I don't want her to get lost against the dark background. Right above the woman's head, you can see a landscape going quite a bit back into the distance. This creates a greater feeling of depth in the picture. So there's this foreground, and there's the middle ground, and then there's the far distant background. If I didn't add that bit of space above her head, the picture wouldn't have that greater feeling of depth to it. I'm thinking of changing the color of the spacecraft. The red is a hue that contrasts strongly with the blue-violet surrounding it and makes the spacecraft stand out quite a bit. Now, the spacecraft isn't as important as the woman and the building in the background. I can't have everything of equal importance. Some things need to be more important than others. So I'm thinking of maybe changing the red to a different color, probably a blue, which would then lessen the hue contrast, and thereby the spacecraft wouldn't command as much attention as they do now. As you approach the later stages of the painting, start adding smaller and smaller shapes, more detail. You can see me adding these flags and flagpoles on the building. The small shapes, the details are being added. And also on the spacecraft, smaller shapes are added. Lights are added to the bottom of the spacecraft, these small spots of red. The red hue is being repeated. Here again, the principle of design repetition is being used with color. Repetition of shape and form and color. All of these different elements of design need to be repeated within a picture. And I'm adding some different greens to the vegetation on the left. Now, the brighter greens are added more toward where the entrance is, to draw the eye to the center of interest, which is where the entrance of the building is. As the painting develops, you may need to add additional textures, and you can add those textures by looking for photos in which the textures that you're looking for can be found, and then you use those photos with the overlay blending mode, and they'll be added to the images in your picture, adding additional texture. Now you need to create contrasting textures for interest. After you have the various colors established and you want to bring a greater feeling of unity to all of the colors, you can use the photo filter by applying one color over the entire painting, as I'm doing here. By applying blue over all of the different hues, I bring them all closer together into a more harmonious relationship to each other, and thereby create a greater feeling of unity of color. You can see what a huge change has occurred with the color from when I started. Remember, you start out by not trying to add colors to the various photos that you're beginning your composition with. Keep them the way they are. And then later, as the painting develops, you begin to change their color so that they conform more to a particular color scheme that you want to establish. I'm changing the color of the spacecraft to more of a blue-violet, but a lighter value. The value is similar to the value of the building. thereby creating a larger light value pattern shape, and that light pattern helps to hold the different shapes together. And by making the spacecraft a blue-violet color, it blends in more with the surrounding blue color, which predominates the painting. Now, the spacecraft doesn't stand out as much or doesn't pop as much as it did when it was red. And this means that other images within the picture, such as the girl, will attract more attention, which is what I want. I'm keeping things a bit more loose. I'm not finishing up everything so that it looks perfectly polished. This is more of a rough color sketch than an actual finished painting. But it gets close to being finished. Many concept art paintings use suggestion, and they have an unfinished appearance or look to them, which is very appealing. And they have a loose look also, which this painting has more of. It's actually not a good idea to tighten things up too much. If you do that, the painting will look stiff and dead. A more lifelike look and appearance can be achieved when things appear to be more suggestive and more loose. It will give your painting a more spontaneous appearance. It'll look like it wasn't labored over. And that is actually more appealing than a painting that looks perfect in every way, where everything is rendered perfectly. As you continue working on the painting, you need to enlarge sections of it so that you can get a nice close-up view and make changes to the various parts, get them a bit more precise looking. There's too much detail here at the entrance. When forms recede back into space, there is less detail to be seen on them. And this detail is way too sharp for a form that is further back in space. The sharpest forms should appear further forward, while forms that are further back have softer edges. So these edges here are much too sharp. I'm going to enlarge this section and then start reducing the sharp detail here by placing the right side in shadow like this. And then just adding some darks here and there and smudging out some of this detail so that it doesn't look as sharp, so that there are softer edges there and less detail. Now let's see what it looks like at a lower magnification, and I think that's much better. Compare what was there before, see how sharp that detail is, and now it's more fuzzy, it's not as sharp. And now the entrance looks further back in space. And also, it looks more in line with the loose and more suggestive handling of the other forms. This version looks out of place. This doesn't. Now that I'm approaching the end of this painting, I take a careful look to see where things can be improved. For example, the shape of the spacecraft isn't interesting enough, so I'm going to make some quick changes here. I'll enlarge one of these shapes like that, and then where the cockpit is, I'll make some changes here. And this part of the front of the spacecraft will be pointing down to the woman. It acts as a kind of arrow pointing to her. And then I'll add this landing leg here. And a tail for the back right there. And by adding that light shape of the tail here, it connects up with the light shape of these buildings back here. So it creates one large connected shape, helping to unify the forms. Now this is where a knowledge of the principle of unity comes in. One of the fundamentals of design that you need to learn if you don't already know about that. So I'm going to jump ahead and show you what the finished painting looks like after I've made these various changes to it. I'm going to go to color balance and add some more blue and darken the overall value of the painting somewhat. Something like this, for example. And maybe add a little bit of red in there. It mixes with the blue, takes it a little bit toward the blue-violet. Something like this. And that color is now applied to all of the shapes within the painting. And if it appears a bit too saturated, I can always reduce the saturation by going to Hue, Saturation, and then reducing the amount of saturation. Like that. I think I may darken the whole thing by going to Levels and darken it a little bit more so that the dominant value key appears more like a low major, as it's called. Now, if you don't know about value keys, it's very important that you learn this. The value key of a painting helps to establish the mood of the painting. So it's important that you learn about them. Now, with me applying this blue color over the entire painting, the warmer colors on the building have now been cooled down somewhat because they have also received some of that blue color. And because of that, the building now seems to be pushed back even further in space. It's been cooled down. Cooler colors are usually found more in the distance rather than in the foreground. So by cooling down the building, it pushes back more in space. And now there's also a greater feeling of unified color because of this blue being added to all of the shapes and forms. Now I did this earlier in the video, but I repeated it again because it needed to have even more blue applied. I think that's about as far as I'm going to take this painting. And you can see how much it has changed from those first initial stages in which I brought in the various photographs. So what you start out with doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to end up with what you started out with. All sorts of changes will be made, and the end result could look quite different from the first initial stages. Now this spaceship, as you can see, doesn't look anything like a ladybug, which I started out with, but it transformed or morphed into this spacecraft that has this bug-like appearance. But remember what I said in the video, that just throwing a bunch of photographs together without applying the fundamentals will not work. Therefore, you need to know the fundamentals. And if you know them, then try this approach, and I'm sure you're going to see that it's going to work very well for you. It's a good idea to carefully look at your painting as you approach the end of it, as it reaches a finished state, to see if there's anything that you can improve upon within the painting. So as I'm looking at the painting, I can see that it's a little too dark and it needs to be made a bit lighter in value. So that's what I'm going to do now. And I'll go to Adjustments and over to Levels, and then move the slider over just a little bit to make the whole painting a little lighter in value. Something like this. I think this works better. You can see the forms more clearly now. They're not hidden so much by all of the dark. Also, right here where the trees are, I need to add some more saturated greens. The light is hitting this part of the trees, so therefore the green color needs to be a bit brighter. Something like this maybe. Also, I noticed that the horizon line right there, you see, is way too far up. And the horizon is actually somewhere around here. Therefore, this horizon line needs to be eliminated. And I'll do that now, like this. And I think I'll darken this part here where the mountain is so that the mountain shows up a little bit better. Also, as I'm looking at the painting, I'm thinking that I need some hue contrast within this area. There's too much of the blues and blue-violet colors. It needs some relief through hue contrast, so what I could do, I think, is pick up the green that I have over here and then just repeat it on this spacecraft as well as this smaller one here. So I think that's what I'm going to do. And I'll add that green right there. And then right here, where these windows are, and then on that smaller one further back. And that green helps to give some relief to all of the blues and blue-violet colors, thereby adding some contrast of hue within this area and making that area appear more interesting looking. By repeating the green color as I did, I'm applying the principle of design called repetition. And repetition is very important in establishing unity within a painting. I talk a lot about the principles of design in my course on design and composition. So if you're interested in learning more about the principles of design and how to apply them to your paintings, you might want to check out some of my videos on design and composition. And now I want to bring in the layers palette and show you a little trick that is very useful. Create a layer and then fill that layer in black. You see that layer right here in black. And then go to the blending modes and select saturation. And when you select that layer, you can see your painting in grayscale or black and white. And you can see what the value pattern looks like. So it's a very quick and easy way to check your values by doing this. Now, what I also want to do is add another layer and then change some color. So on this new layer, I'll go to the blending modes and down to color. And then I'll select my color here at the color picker. And I want to add a blue, something like this maybe, to the building in the rear here, just to cool down that building a bit and push it further back into space. And that blue harmonizes with the dominant blue violet color. And I think a little more color is needed. Something like that. And I need to change the color a little bit more, and also there's just a little too much texture that can be seen here on these buildings. When a form is that far back, you're not going to see that kind of texture, so I'm going to just go over it with a blue color and knock out some of that texture like this so that you don't see quite as much. And that helps to push the buildings even further back in space. I think I'm going to change the color again, a little more toward the violet, something like that. And I'll just go over it like this. And also for the entrance here. I think that works better. Harmonizes better with the rest of the colors in the painting and helps to push everything further back. And then some parts of the entrance is going to receive a bit more light, so I'm going to add a lighter value and a bit warmer color. I'll also add a little bit of that cooler blue-violet color here to the ground area right there. See this part right there? That's been cooled down a little bit. Now I need a stronger focal point usually the focal point is a figure, and there's a figure over here, as you know. So I could add a lighter and more saturated color to her, which means that she's receiving more light, but I think I want the building, or this entrance here, to be the focal point rather than the figure. Now the figure over here helps to balance out the picture so that not all the interest is situated here. When you have a horizontal format shape like this that you're working in, you need to balance out the interest. You have interest on one side, you need something on the other side that's interesting as well, so that the eye flows from one part of the picture to another. So it moves back and forth, in other words. If I have all the interest here, and if I didn't have this figure here, then the eye wouldn't move around the picture. There wouldn't be anything over here to move the eye to this part of the picture. So it's very important to balance out the composition like that. So I'm going to draw the eye right there to that part of the building, and to do that I need to increase the value contrast and also warm up the colors. So I'm going to lighten the value and move the color slider a bit more toward the red-violet, which warms up that color. And then I'll take a look and see what it looks like once I add it. So the light is falling on parts of this building, thereby helping to draw attention to this part. Now this center of interest shouldn't be too dominant. It shouldn't be so strong that it overpowers the whole picture. If that happens, then the eye of the viewer is going to be riveted to one spot and won't be encouraged to move to other parts of the picture. Therefore, be sure you don't make the center of interest too dominant or overly dominant. And I think this is good. It doesn't overpower the entire picture so much that you don't move to other parts of it. If the color looks too cool, it can be warmed up by adding a little more red, like this, moving the slider toward the red more. And then I'll just go over that, warm it up a little bit. You can see it warming up. And I think I'll make her a little bit lighter so that she stands out a little more. But I don't want her to compete with the center of interest. So I'm going to keep her dark for the most part. Now this is just a rough color sketch. It's not a finished painting. So I'm keeping it loose, but there are some things that I need to sharpen up a little bit, like on the entrance here. Just give a little more definition to some of these parts. And let me see what that looks like by reducing the size. I think that's good. See what it looks like in grayscale? You can see that this part is light in value compared to the surrounding values, therefore it helps to attract the eye there. The eye will be attracted to light values. So when you make something light like that, the eye is going to go to that part of the picture. Always also try to place the darkest dark next to the lightest light, giving the strongest value contrast, which attracts the eye of the viewer. And I think I might darken this part just a little bit. So I'll come over here with a color and just go over this part like that, just a little bit. Darkening it somewhat and warming it a little bit. What I did was pick up this color here and add it to this monorail. Now I think I'll add a few more of these lighter colors that you see here on the entrance. Just some spots here like this on some of those buildings, so that not all of the light color is situated right here. So the light is also falling on some parts of these buildings back here. So something like this. And I think it needs one more thing, and that is a stronger accent. And I'm going to add a more saturated red right there, as you can see. And that helps to draw the eye to the center of interest, which is, of course, this area here. That might be a little too strong, so I'm going to reduce the opacity on this layer. I think that's better. And that's about as far as I'm going to take this rough color sketch. I hope you learned something from this video and that you'll apply what you've learned to your own paintings.